I was what I would call a born humanitarian. I don't like to see people suffer. I don't like to see cruelty, even to this day.
Abortions have been legal for thousands of years. In the ancient times, to perform abortions, they would use herbal remedies, pressure on the abdomen, and also sharp objects. After that, abortions were still advertised and commonly performed. In the 1800s, there was a movement to use the banning of abortions as a way to engineer the racial makeup of the United States population. People who deemed Irish immigrants undesirable wanted to limit Anglo-Americans from terminating pregnancies.
I feel like it's largely a religious thing, but I could be simplifying it, but I think that's been my experience, is that generally speaking, it's a religious perspective.
The Christian religion, among others, were also very strictly against abortions and the use of birth control. This didn't stop women to try and get abortions or even give them. Women would kick or punch themselves in the stomach, throw themselves down the stairs, purposely get hypothermia or lie in hot baths, and of course use the famous coat hanger method to terminate their pregnancy. The coat hanger method is when the person shoves a wire coat hanger into their uterus in order to get the fetus to detach. From the documentary, Motherless, A Legacy of Loss from Illegal Abortion, Louis Gertzley, MD, said, "Anything that was metal and long and thin would be used." Back then, women were stereotyped for being overtaken by their feelings and were just meant to take care of the home, the children, and reproduce. The fight for more women's overall rights began in 1848, but it would be a little bit before their reproductive rights were properly addressed. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was born in 1879. She opposed the Comstock Act of 1873, which prohibited education on birth control and contraceptive equipment to be transferred through the mail. By 1880, abortions were illegal in the U.S. unless it was necessary to save the life of the woman. Making abortions illegal made the only other way for women to get them was giving themselves abortions, which of course were unsafe. In 1910, Margaret Sanger was in Europe when Mary Dennett started the National Birth Control League. They wrote literature on birth control, were a part of conferences, and made sure there was no legislation stopping them. All of the NBCL actions were published in the Birth Control Review, a periodical started by Margaret Sanger. In 1912, Margaret Sanger wrote an autobiography about a woman who almost died by a self-induced abortion. This was what sparked the change in Margaret Sanger.
So there's a number of things that are one after the other that really made you feel that you had to do something.
In 1915, the birth control movement began with very familiar faces as leaders: Mary Dennett, Emma Goldman, and Margaret Sanger. Then, just a year later, in New York, the first birth control clinic was started by Margaret Sanger. Women got the information they needed. 9 days later, the clinic was shut down and Margaret Sanger was put in jail.
So then what did she do? She got arrested and she started passing out birth control pamphlets in jail, right? Like, that's taking a stand, right? That is saying nothing is going to stop me in these efforts.
They say, is that first of all, the primary function of sex in marriage is to beget children. Do you disagree with that?
I disagree with it 100%.
Your feeling is what then?
My feeling is love and the attraction between men and women. In many cases, the very finest relationship has nothing to do with bearing a child.
The conference was to take place at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Margaret Sanger was the organizer and was planning on giving the opening and the closing speech. Many people were attending this 3-day conference focusing on the global birth control consequences. They were there to publicize birth control and to announce the formation of the American Birth Control League. This meeting was meant for different birth control advocates to come together and discuss what needs to happen for the future.
We wouldn't be even as close to being an equal society as we are without Planned Parenthood, without sort of the Margaret Sanger not only created Planned Parenthood, but she was also the instigator behind the actual birth control pill in the 1960s, right? She was one of the leading women who fought for that and got the funding for it and persuaded a scientist to work on it. And where would we be without the birth control pill? I mean, there would be other forms of contraception, but not nearly something as universal and as easily used and as effective.
However, the meeting came to an abrupt ending when the speech ended in a police raid. Margaret Sanger and another speaker were arrested on account of disorderly conduct. Margaret Sanger ended up giving her speech on the 18th of November. The biggest thing that came out of the meetings was the unveiling of the American Birth Control League. Margaret Sanger's lectures and tours started smaller birth control leagues around the country and the start of clinics and the birth control movement in 1915. The action was contagious. All of this resulted in an organization that offers education on birth control from subject matter experts and safe, reliable birth control.
I mean, it was basically Margaret Sanger, our founder, kind of paved the way for the modernity, if you will, of healthcare in this country by allowing women to have access to contraceptives 100 years ago.
The formation of the American Birth Control League resulted in many changes to the way birth control was thought of. On April 5, 1922, the American Birth Control League was already incorporated in the state of New York. They helped get birth control clinics started, organize conferences and meetings about birth control. The ABCL already had many advocators. Physicians, scientists, and New York socialites were all ABCL enthusiasts. In 1923, the first legal birth control clinic was started, titled the Clinical Research Bureau. This clinic opened on January 2, 1923, but was kept private for they didn't want the clinic to end up like the first one, shut down in 9 days. What this clinic did for the next 11 months before it was released to the public in December of 23 was conduct research experiments to help others in the future. They offered counseling with follow-up checkups and contraceptive services. This was the largest clinic in the country. In 1924, the American Birth Control League had 27,500 members and was branched out in 10 different states. And by 1926, they had 37,000 members.
I think driving past them is hard. I think it's harder to walk past them or ride your bike past them because they can be, the things that they say to you would curl your hair. The things that they say, and I'm not a woman, right? The things that I can only imagine what they say to a young woman coming in.
Margaret Sanger was the president of the American Birth Control League from 1921 to 1928 when she resigned because of a dispute with Eleanor Dwight Jones, who became president after Margaret Sanger left. Margaret Sanger then took full control of the Clinical Research Bureau and disconnected all legal ties with the American Birth Control League and changed its name to the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau. Then, in 1932, while Eleanor Dwight Jones was still president, the American Birth Control League and the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau merged together to be the Birth Control Federation of America. In 1942, they changed their name to Planned Parenthood Federation of America, which is what we still have today.
When Planned Parenthood makes it to 200 years, which I think it will, we'll be able to and we'll still be fighting. We'll still be fighting. We'll still be taking a stand on the issues that we believe in, and caring no matter what is one of the things that we say, and standing up no matter what the odds, and no matter how desperate it feels or how much of a losing proposition it feels. I think that Planned Parenthood will always sort of be the group that sort of looks for that optimism and says we're going to push on.
The start of Planned Parenthood was a very important milestone for the fight for women's health and reproductive rights. The legacy is still alive for when Planned Parenthood took a stand in a history about 100 years ago, and even now they are still taking a stand. Roe v. Wade was a big deal for Planned Parenthood. This was a trial between Jane Roe, a single mother who was hoping to terminate a pregnancy, and Henry Wade, the Dallas district attorney. The case went on for 2 years, and Jane Roe eventually did have her child. In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court made the decision stating that the legalization of abortion falls under the 14th Amendment. Although Jane Roe wasn't able to get an abortion, this case and what the Supreme Court decided allowed many other women the opportunity to get an abortion. The abortion rates have actually gone down after the Roe v. Wade case. In 1973, the abortion rates for women ages 15 through 44 were 16.3 out of 1,000, and in 2014 it was 14.6 out of 1,000. Cecil Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood from 2006 to present, said, "It shows we're finally doing a better job of helping women get access to birth control that's affordable and that's high quality." Planned Parenthood yearly approximately gives 270,000 Pap tests, 360,000 breast exams, prevents 579,000 fortuitous pregnancies, and about 2.5 million men and women visit Planned Parenthood yearly. Although this is all legal and it can happen in public instead of back alley clinics, Planned Parenthood is still fighting for what they believe in and taking a stand as history is being made. At the first American Birth Control Conference, Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League. She led others to take a stand by protesting the lack of women's health and reproductive rights and going against the status quo. As a result, there was an increase of awareness, the formation of the ABCL, and clinics concerning women's reproductive rights that are still used today.